Hello and welcome to Fraud Talk, the ACFE's monthly podcast. I'm Rihonna Scoggins, the community manager for the ACFE, and today we're joined by Jenny Radcliffe, aka the People Hacker, an ethical social engineer and burglar for hire. She helps companies test their security through simulated criminal attacks using her social engineering skills. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Your experience is really interesting, to say the least. And now you're at this point where you've spoken at many events and for different companies, and some of our own members may even recognize your voice from our Anti-Fraud Leadership Summit that we had last year. Can you tell us a bit about your unconventional experience that led you to where you are now, giving talks, authoring books, and helping companies?
Sure. I mean, it's within the security industry, social engineering is not such an unusual job, although a lot of the time people who do the same job to me use technology. I mean, social engineering is all about hacking a company at their request, at least when you do it ethically, like I do, at their request. It's sort of a cross between a fire drill and sort of Ocean's 11, but we're not that good looking, right? We put together a team. I put together a team. Sometimes I work on my own, in order to test the human side of a business's security. So that would be everything from whether people follow the rules or whether we let people tailgate through gates in reception, whether we give our details away or information away through phishing emails or phone calls. And also what I do that's not as well known is we actually break into buildings. So we actually do our best to bypass security, to get into a site and work our way around that site to find out. Sometimes we have a target from the client, but sometimes it's just generally, are there any things that I might see that I think could be a security risk? And then it's an education piece. We report back to the client and we help them fix those issues so that the real criminals can't do it for real. And I guess, this is a job that I've done in the open for maybe 15 years, but all my life, really. And that's because nobody really spoke about this until cyber became a thing and the internet became a thing, and you realize that there was more people than just me who did this. But I started just as a kid where I grew up in the UK. And it was not such a great neighborhood. A couple of things happened when I was younger that were a bit dangerous. So my parents basically asked my family, my older cousins, who were much older than me, much more streetwise than me, to sort of teach me a few things and to look after me. And I ended up following them, getting into empty buildings, derelict buildings, just out of curiosity. And gradually we got into occupied buildings, but that was at the request of the owners, just as sort of a little job. And then I gradually grew the business into what it is today.
It's so interesting how you paved your way into this career. Can you tell us about your first ethical social engineering job? Did the company come to you? How were you recruited for that? Were you like, hey, I know I can get info from your employees that you wouldn't like. Do you want to pay me for it?
So, I mean, it depends what we say, it depends what you say. Those first jobs that we did after we sort of did it as a hobby, somebody had said, we had soccer players live near where I am from, and they had big houses, and a lot of robberies were happening in the neighborhood at the time. And they asked us, well, if you can get into buildings, is there a way that you can get into our house and show us what's vulnerable and help us fix it? And they paid us for that, me and my cousins. But I was very young at the time. I was involved because, being a woman, I was less threatening to the families and the wives and things, and so than the boys were. So really those are the first real paid jobs. And then I was paid to look at a government building in Liverpool, where I'm from, by someone who sort of was a friend of a friend. He knew people in my family, and I honestly, don't really know where he got my name from, but I guess we've done a few of these jobs in and around Liverpool, and it was unusual. And the boys were kind of just about on the right side of the law, but they were, security guys in bars and things. So, slightly less kind of, I suppose, biddable than I was at that age. And also I did all the reports. So there was me. And I actually got a call at home that asked me to go into this government building and steal a diary from a desk. Just because as a security test, like, can it be done? Is the security adequate? Would the guards stop you? But I didn't ask enough questions. And, even though I now know that the reasons behind that, and that it was justified and legitimate in a way, it wasn't as legitimate as we do it now. In other words, I'm not sure that the guy who actually owned the diary knew, but everyone else around him knew. So the company and everything knew, and security guards, because he turned out not to be a very good person.
Gotcha.
So that was the first time I ever worked on my own. And when I got the call, I said, well, I'll ring the boys and I'll see if they're free. And the client said, well, do you have to do that? Do you need them? And it just occurred to me that I probably didn't, I called them anyway. And they said, no, go for it, make some money. And then after that, it just kind of built and built. I think because it's an unusual job, the way I approached it was very unusual. Because, Rihonna, I had no tech skills. I had no money. So it was all about outthinking the building, the security team, and the target. And that's what makes my job and the way I do it more unusual, I guess.
Definitely. Like you said earlier and just then, you don't use any special technology or tools for your work. You're really just armed with your words, which is a little bit scarier, I have to say. You don't need all these tools to do your job and do it well.
I mean, they help. I mean, I've got colleagues and people in my network who are brilliant hackers and who can bypass security in lots of different ways, and that's wonderful, and I wish I had those skills. I don't. It's not too late to learn, but I kind of don't have the time. But I think it was more a case of what makes it so compelling to security teams is that kind of we can throw millions at security, fences and alarms and doors and anti-malware, and and the tech's very good. It does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to keeping our businesses and ourselves safe. But I think what's compelling is that because a human's in control of that technology, a human can be bypassed. And so for us, our sort of our USP, really, our niche, my niche, was that, look, in the absence of that, can we do it in a more human way, a more elegant way, a more simple way? Because those are the ones that get past. The tech can be hacked. Everyone kind of knows that can happen, but it's very, very good. So what, is there a simple thing that could be done that makes sort of exposes us in the same way? And so I use skills like negotiation techniques, influence, persuasion, reading non-verbal communications, deception work. I mean, there's lots of things that we use to just make people do what we want them to do, which is very often open a door or share information.
Right. You mentioned these different tactics that you use. In your opinion, what are some of the most effective techniques or tactics for social engineering? And, maybe, how can people or companies protect themselves from being manipulated by social engineers in just the simplest way? I know there's so much more than can be said in a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean. So what people need to, if we take the first part of that question, which is what techniques and tactics, the technique that is the most effective still is phishing emails, right? And even though we put lots of protection in and we have lots of tests, and the jury is out in the security community of whether those phishing tests are really effective, because we can write things to make sure that people fall or don't fall for them, right? But the email is the way to get people to interact with a hacker. And so what's happening with social engineering is that it's a blended attack. It's the human alongside technology. So you need a human to write a convincing script, and then the technology to access the system if they click on the link or open the attachment, right? But what social engineering will also try and do is try and get people off technology as soon as we can. Get them out off the site, off the network, because criminals know that that's what protected and detection is likely. But a phone call or a social media interaction leaves less of a footprint, is harder to trace. So the techniques are everything from those text messages to vishing calls, scam phone calls, all the way up to in-person kind of chance meetings in quotation marks, and social media interactions. And for example, something like romance fraud might start with social media, but the target might be where you work. It might be that they look you up on, say, LinkedIn, find out where you work, and then sort of research you a little bit, and then try and get to know you as access to the company. So people often think that they're not rich enough or important enough to be hacked, but everyone's worth hacking. And the techniques will always be, whatever way humans communicate can be manipulated by a criminal. Now, how do they do it though? Well, from a tactics point of view, and I spoke about this when I spoke for the conference in New York, there are red flags, and there's lots of different ones, but really, I essentially boil it down to 4 things. They're going to make people feel emotional in some way. So, is it the sob story on a romance fraud that, they've had an accident, they need medical bills, they've been caught up in some, natural disaster and they need the airfare. There'll be some emotional element to these stories, often, as in those 2 examples, mixed with urgency. And then money is going to come into the equation. And so is a call to action. So the 4 things are, emotional content, some sort of time, urgency, and then money usually, as well as a call to action. Now, it's difficult with money because obviously we all deal with money, and we all deal, for that matter, with emails, with links and attachments all the time. So it's difficult. But that's really how they're going to try and get you with social engineering. And in terms of the build-ins and stuff, it's similar things, it depends on the client, what story, what script will work, but they will fit it to something around those things. So that's really what's happening. And social engineering attacks that involve human error or manipulation, are a very high percentage of cyber attacks, because they enable cyber attacks, they enable hackers. Once they need a way in, and that's usually human that gives them that. But I think the numbers are, some think tanks give it as much as 95% more. It's a huge amount, because someone somewhere has to kind of give access ultimately. So that's that side of it. Now, you asked me, Rihonna, about what we can do to prevent it as companies. And there is a lot of things. I mean, you have to have technology these days to try and block some of the malware and things that come through on email. And we have to pay for good security in terms of our networks and our teams. And it's expensive, people do still see it as a cost center, but it is so much better to do it than be hacked, right?
Right.
Or conned or defrauded. So, it's no longer just a cost center that we will kind of negotiate whether or not we need. You have to have security in your business, regardless of the size. And then we have human things that are free or almost free. I mean, for example, security awareness training for your team, you can spend millions and millions, depending on the size of the organization. But the truth is, as long as the team are talking about security, there's a lot of free resources out there that you can find with basic awareness advice. Lots of videos, podcasts like this with people like myself can all help your team be aware. And what needs to happen is that team needs to know what social engineering is and the stuff that goes along with it from a cyber point of view. But the thing is, the stuff I specialize in is much more compelling than cyber a lot of the time, right? So a lot of people want to hear about someone breaking into a building as opposed to another virus, right? It's just true. But it's available. People need to know it. They need to talk about it in their weekly meetings, in their line management meetings. every week. So did anybody get fished this week? Did anyone see an email that looked dodgy? Why do you think it looked dodgy? Has anyone seen a movie with fraud in? Has anyone seen, an article in the news about hacking? And it just has to become part of the conversation, kind of in the same way the health and safety did, right? That you just have to have your team talking about this amongst themselves. It cannot be that you have a security person or throw money at some security tools and it fixes it. It just doesn't. It has to become part of culture. So there's all of that stuff. And then it has to be that people feel comfortable reporting when they've made a mistake or when they think they've been conned. And that's a cultural thing within organizations. If we blame people for falling for this, no one will ever say when they think they've fallen for it. So all of that is kind of part of it. But then there's basic, what we call cyber hygiene. So there's basic things that can stop you being conned and defrauded as a company. And partly is keep your tech up to date. If you look at something like WannaCry, which was a big attack a couple of years ago, big cyber attack, that took out a lot of the UK healthcare system for a couple of days. But there was a patch available. People just hadn't updated their apps, hadn't updated their software. People still reuse passwords. They still share passwords amongst teams and things for certain things. All of that stuff that we all kind of know, or at least have been told, it only works if we do it. And then it's just making yourself a harder target. Don't put everything about you out online. And that goes for the business as well as personal. Control your audience, control what's in the post and the picture, put that attacker head on and see things from an attacker mindset. If I meant this company ill, how could I use this information? And then we have to carry on with our lives and our businesses, but it's a big answer. It's a long answer to a short question, but it's important because I will talk about this endlessly if it helps people protect themselves.
No, definitely. Thank you so much for all of that info. I knew it would be a lot, but I think, like you said, it's incredibly important. And my favorite kind of nugget of knowledge from that is that it's not any one person's job, to protect a company. It's every employee's. We all have to be careful and safe. And like you said, we have to, sort of get rid of this stigma around being a victim of, a phishing attack or, any sort of fraud. That way we can talk about it and learn from it. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So with the career that you have, is there a, conventional route into getting into it? Is there any sort of training or education or experience you may recommend to a CFE or someone who's looking into having a career as an ethical social engineer?
There really isn't, and there isn't even really. I mean, there's a huge gap in the market for me to do training on this, right? But there really isn't anything that I would out and out recommend in terms of purely what I do. Now, if we look at the cyberspace, there's lots and lots of courses that are technical in nature, and some of them have a social engineering element. But for example, I had a friend of mine went on a very popular course that was billed as social engineering. It cost thousands of pounds. It was done virtually on a global basis. And she came to me at the end. She said, it's not social engineering. She said, there's like an element of influence, from Robert Cialdini's work. There's some element of body language from Paul Ekman's work, but really, it's not really what you do. And this is the problem. It's not really pure social engineering. And that's for a couple of reasons. It's because technical skills are so useful and harder to kind of be certified. Well, easier to be certified in, but sort of harder to social engineering is hard to isolate, right? So people want some technical skills as well. Social engineering in and of itself is something that's quite hard to learn because what it really relies on is an interest in people, right? And in human behavior. So it sort of takes in lots of different routes. It takes in psychology, even anthropology, some linguistics elements there. to analyze scripts and to help persuade and influence people. So there isn't really like a conventional route into it. What I say to people is, if you really are interested in social engineering, then I've listed already a lot of areas that you should look into, right? But you should also start to follow some of the security community, because something like B-sides, so there's something called the security B-sides, and you can look it up on YouTube or online. And these are community conferences, not for profit, and they're held all over the world. The first one was in Las Vegas. There's lots and lots in America. I think Vegas is the biggest, then London is the second biggest. But that involves people from the community, non-paid speakers, going and speaking at these things and talking about their career, their research. And within that, there's lots and lots. It's a mine of information for anyone who's interested in these things. And I think what it does is it sort of shows people, oh, look, there's lots of routes and lots of jobs in security. I don't have to be purely technical, but these are the technical skills that help. And I think what happens is people with some technical skills and an interest in social engineering tend to get jobs then with firms that do pen testing, which is what we're talking about, penetration test. And so there's no conventional route into it, but if you're good with people, and you've got an interest in security, you'll find a way. And if you're good with people with an interest in security and a couple of technical skills, then you're likely to get a job at a technical level to start with, and then be deployed on jobs that involve social engineering. Again, a long answer, but there isn't a simple one, I'm afraid, for a lot of this.
So you said that you will sometimes work with a team, sometimes work by yourself. So this team of people that you work with and that you have, is that sort of their background as well? Is that kind of their route, or is it a hodgepodge of different experience?
I love that word. It's a hodgepodge. So what I don't I don't have a permanent crew, so I recruit the crew depending on the job and the client, right? So I would use a different crew if we were looking at a hotel, than I would maybe a private residence or a hospital. And they have different skills and different backgrounds, and it's a contract basis for me. Now, other teams, other security firms do have permanent employees, but for me, that means that we say, oh, someone's asked for social engineering, so we'll put our social engineers on the job, as opposed to someone's asked us for social engineering. Who do we need? So do we need former military people who are big and tough and angry and can pull doors off their hinges? Do we need hackers with a particular expertise in a certain type of cyber attack? Do we need people who can climb high buildings? Do we need role players who will fit in with the culture and the aesthetic of the company? And we fit. That's how I work. I fit the team to the job, and I recruit from my network. I have some people I always work with, but I recruit from the network. So that's really the way that I do it. And all of those people who've worked with me in the past are very welcome to come out and say they've worked with me, but I'm kind of fairly sure they won't. And that's just because I always recruited people who were more interested in the job than the spotlight. And I think certainly in the last year or two, it was starting to become clear that because I was so focused on bringing this message to the wider public and to speak in and doing whatever work I could to spread the word, that I would be the one that would probably do that. Now, if they come out and do it, that's fine. But it's just that I have a feeling that probably most of them won't. But no, there's no, and some of them are just still in a normal, regular job. They just help me out now and again. So just think of that, everyone who's listening. You could be doing whatever job you do all the time and then take a few days off one week and come and work with me. That's what we're saying.
This is all just a recruitment message.
Just a recruitment drive. Absolutely.
So I kind of want to go back a little bit. You mentioned one job that you did where you were, getting that diary. So you're, a big part of your role is the fact that you're doing all of this for the right reasons, right? And you're doing it ethically. So What are some of the ethical considerations that come into play when you're engaging in the work the way that you do? How do you ensure that you're not crossing any sort of legal or moral boundaries when you're running these simulated attacks?
Well, these days we have a contract that says this is what you're allowed to do, and this is the boundary, and the same goes to the client. This is what we're going to do, and they agree it, and and that's all fine and dandy in terms of legal.
Mhm.
Ethically, I make very sure, apart from the obvious things like we don't steal anything or break
Mhm.
anything without permission. By which I mean, if we steal anything, we bag it up and give it back. If we break anything, it's within the contract that we're allowed. So sometimes we'll say by destructive / non-destructive means, right? So the
Mhm.
client can say, well, sometimes they'll say it's okay to use destruction safely to the tune of say $3,000 or something. What
Mhm.
that means is we could break a window or a door or a lock or an alarm, maybe a small one on one door. But very often I will say we'll do it non-destructively, right? So,
Mhm.
so we're not going to actually blow the doors off. Some people know what that's from. And I avoided cursing there. Um, but ethically is slightly different because obviously we are bamboozling people, even though it's with good heart and with the best of intentions. So from an ethical point of view, we have meetings with the client. We do talk to them upfront and say, nobody can be fired as a result of falling for what we're about to do because we are professional con artists and
Mhm.
therefore they will be conned, right? Sooner or later, someone will fall for it. But I also go and meet with the people that we've directly face-to-face conned or over email. And I do speak to them one-to-one and talk to them about why they shouldn't feel bad about this and sort of spin it in as much as, and the spin on this is, you've learned a big lesson. You're not stupid for falling for this. You were just targeted, and that can happen to anyone. It could happen to me.
Mhm.
Um, and now you're an ambassador for this, right? So now you know how it works. Now you can see that anyone can be fooled. And what we ask you to do is don't beat yourself up, but talk to people and tell them how this was done. And I think ethically that's the main thing is that first, do no harm.
Mhm.
Do not hurt people on our quest for security, if you like. Um, and so we only take that as far as it needs to go, and we do everything we can to try and make sure that those people don't feel bad. Um, but then on the job, we don't reveal who the clients are. So, I've written my book. The book is 300 pages. You can't tell who the clients are. You might have a good guess.
Mhm.
And certainly some of the UK references, I've had journalists already say, well, was it this person? And I just will never confirm or deny who they are. The clients are protected through redaction. Basically, we've redacted and changed some details, which I made very clear. So we never name them. Although the book gives a lot of tactics that we've used and lots of examples. And unfortunately, the book's not in America yet. It won't be. We're still negotiating the US contracts actually, but it will be hopefully this year. But although I've given some away, that's nothing that you couldn't find out if you were determined to do so online. So I kind of feel okay about that as well. Although I always worry. And then the other thing is that we don't steal or do anything that we don't need to do to get the job done, right? So there's no showboating. I always say there's no parrots, we don't talk. There's no peacocks, we don't show off. And there's no magpies. In other words, we're not distracted by the shiny things.
Mhm.
We don't take the shiny things. And that's really the ethical consideration. Legally, it's not such a big deal. That's sourced out with the lawyers, but
Mhm.
ethically, we have to cover ourselves for sure.
Definitely. You guys get to have these conversations about what you can and can't do. And the reality is that, criminals don't care. They're not like, "Hey, can we do this or that?" When you are in these situations, do you say, "Hey, we could have done this if we wanted to. That wasn't really the goal of this attack, but we could have, gone this route and even gotten more." How do you sort of disseminate that information to the clients of, maybe just how vulnerable they are?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Sometimes we just explain, so obviously if I had malintent, this would have gone this way. But there are fun ways that we can demonstrate it. So for example, there was a point when I was outside the door of a secure room which controlled, let's just say, something incredibly dangerous, right? I can't really say what it was, but something so dangerous that like it's really bad that I even managed to get to that door. And the next task was to get through the door. And a guy stopped in front of me, and I gave him the script and used a few sort of bits of persuasion, and he had his lunch with him, so his hands were sort of full and he was fiddling with his pass. And as he went to do it, he had the pass in his hand and his lunch in the other hand. A colleague came and she said, wait, you don't know who she is, we haven't seen proper ID, it could be anyone. And to her credit, that stopped us, right? But what I did was I stuck a sticker. So I got a sticker that I had in my hand, and the sticker just said yes written on it. So just a big sticker with the word yes, and I just stuck it on his stomach. And then he's like, what are you doing? And I said, because I could have had a knife, right? Or a gun, basically. Yeah. So we've just shown that, like, in that situation, if I'd have been a criminal, then it wouldn't have been a sticker, it would have been a gun or a knife, and we'd have been in, right? And so, like, that's the demo. So it's a non-lethal, almost funny, sometimes we write tickle on it, sometimes it's just a picture of, a banana or something, just something silly to diffuse it a little bit, but just to show that we had physical contact with that person. And the other thing we do is take a water pistol in a bag, and we take the water pistol and we put sometimes we put some, this is giving things away, but we'll put or a toy gun, right? So basically a toy gun, and we'll put that in a bag, or I'll put it in the back of my pants, or it'll be somewhere on me, sort of hidden in my clothes, like. And then I did one job where, again, I got right to the top guy in this huge important place, and I really should not have been able to get in, and just took it out and just went bang, and it's like clearly a toy gun. Now, just let me say, this is UK, this is bright blue, let's just say for argument's sake, it's got Mickey Mouse on it or something, right? It's really, obviously, I'm not going to hit anyone, but we'll say, and we have actually squirted people with we filled them up with soda and stuff as well, just and got them with the soda, just so it stains, which is terrible, isn't it? But just so it's not just water. And just gone, oops, bang, bang, and like, it's sort of just to show without people being frightened, that we got that close. And I think there's no lesson like a demonstration to show that, right? But I just don't want, we were always very conscious, like, so I wouldn't get like a replica firearm, because someone might be genuinely frightened, and obviously we're the good guys, right? So we're not going to do that. But like, it does show the points. I mean, we've done it again. We'd use, like, I don't know why bananas a feature, but like we'd use bananas as well, just to show, like, we tap someone with a banana. But you could take a banana in anyway, so it doesn't make the same point as a toy gun, for example. And it just shows that the bag wasn't searched. Because they are usually plastic, we actually fill them with metal, but I won't say how we do that.
Crazy interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
That's okay.
When you were talking earlier about all the different type of people you've worked with, and you mentioned, big, strong military guys. But you're not a big, strong military guy. How have you, seen your gender come into play, and how has it helped your work and when you're doing these simulated attacks?
I mean, I'm asked this a lot, and the answer I always give is just that I just don't look dangerous. I mean, those of you who saw me in New York, you knew I didn't look dangerous. Nobody pays me a second glance until they do, right? And I think that's very helpful. it would be less easy to do that, or to walk around, or to make conversation with, you know, a receptionist, or, you know, someone. Just if I was a guy, just because no matter how well dressed you are, there's always that kind of element of someone's physically bigger, or could be hitting on, you know, if it's a woman or whatever, could be hitting on you. I don't have those disadvantages. I have privilege and advantage, because and this is such a paradox, because I'm basically someone who doesn't stand out. I'm a middle-aged woman. I don't particularly stand out. I can be charismatic on stage, I guess, you know, otherwise people wouldn't want me to speak on stage. But, you know, it's very much something that can be switched off. And I think that's really helped. And I just think a guy would struggle a bit more with that anonymity. You know, in terms of what security are looking for. Our prejudices are that men are criminals, that men can be dangerous, and what, you know, and that women are not. And that's not necessarily true. You know, a criminal doesn't always look like what we think a criminal looks like. A hacker doesn't look what we think a hacker looks like from TV and films, you know. I should be wearing a hoodie and all the rest of it. And that's just not how it really works. So I think those things have been useful. And I think as well, people open up to women. Sometimes women particularly might open up more to another woman than maybe a guy. I don't think that's always the case, but I just think it sometimes is the case. And I think that's been helpful as well. You know, there's that empathy, you know, and the women who are listening to this will know what I mean. There's that kind of empathy and that shared experience that's helped. Whereas I think with men, that might be something that might be harder to draw out of someone. Not all the time, but just I think, excuse me, occasionally that might be the case.
Definitely. So, as a woman in this, you know, sort of seemingly male-dominated field of helping companies test their security measures, have you ever faced any challenges or biases in your work? Have you, you know, ever felt like, oh, this, you know, this person doesn't think I can do this because I'm a woman, or because I look so,
I'm letting you struggle. Innocent,
yeah, innocent, yeah.
harmless. Yeah, I mean, so I guess, I mean, yes, I mean, you know, women, I think most women would tell you that there's been times in their lives when they've been, you know, perhaps taken advantage of or underestimated in some way. I would say I was constantly underestimated by people who very much regret that now. You know, constantly, because of where I came from. I mean, I still now get the most ridiculous comments because I have a regional accent. I'm from Liverpool in the UK. It's a regional accent. People might think I've not got a good education, or that I actually am a criminal, which is just so, you know, tone deaf these days to think those things. Or that, you know, I was asked an awful lot in the beginning of my career, you know, who's looking after the family if you're away? As if I was going to go, oh my goodness, I need to make a phone call. Everybody stop everything. I've forgotten about my children or whatever, you know. But even now, you know, the book's come out in February in the UK. It's been already very successful. And I've done a lot of media and interviews about it, which is, you know, I'm very grateful for. But I've been asked an awful lot, what does your husband think about your job? And it just makes me wonder whether anyone would ask a man in the same position, well, what does your wife think about your job? You know, when was the last time you ever heard that? You know, what's that got to do with anything anyway? So I kind of find that I observe it now. It doesn't bother me now because I'm too long in the tooth, I think, and just too grumpy to really worry about it. And these days I'm grumpy with that kind of you know, attitude.
Definitely.
I think certainly from a security point of view, the amount of people whose jaw has hit the floor when I've said it was me, or that we did the job. And who knows whether that was gender based. I think it probably was a lot of the time. And I've certainly been mansplained. Even now, I mean, I had someone read the book and say, oh, you know, you could have done this this way.
Oh, goodness.
And you're like, you know, you don't want to kind of flex, but you could say, "Do you know what? I am probably one of the best people in the world right now at 3 or
Mhm.
4 things that I do, you know,
Yeah.
and you've never done it, and you're telling me how to do this, right? I'm top of my game, son."
Mm.
And I kind of like, you know, people don't like to hear me say that even now. It's like, who are you to try and explain this to me?
Mhm.
And I think we think mansplaining is something that just sounds meant to women, but I think it's people to people, actually. You know, that there's certain times when we just think that we've got the right to give someone an opinion. And I just would caution all of us, men or women,
Mhm.
about just be very careful what you assume about a person. I mean, I'll just give you another example. I did a gig. I can't say much about it because it will totally give it away because it was all over the media, but I did a gig and there was this young guy who was lovely in every way. And it was a speaking sort of engagement. And there was probably 200 people there, something like
Mm.
that. Bear in mind, I do over 100 speaking engagements a year all over the world. Some of them are virtual with tens of thousands of people. Some of them are very scary because there's 6 people, but they'll all be hugely important directors of some
Mhm.
massive brand. But the vast majority of them are at least 200 to 400 people in a room all the time. And I've done that job, you know, keynote speaking, again at the sort of top of the category for where that I'd be put, for easily 20 years, you know, off and on.
Mm.
And this little chap says to me, "Oh, there's 200 people tonight." And I said, "Oh yeah." And he said, "Oh, you're nervous." And he, you know, you just go, "I know you mean well,
Mhm.
but you know, think about what you're saying before you say that to me. You know, I'm a paid for keynote here.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and it wasn't. I am often asked, "Do you get nervous?"
Mhm.
That's different than what he was saying. He was kind of
Mhm.
saying, I suppose that you are nervous because you're speaking in front of people." So I
Right.
said, I'm not really nervous now." And he said, "Oh, do you do many of these?" And so, you know, it's that whole, I suppose it's that whole thing of, I don't expect him to know that,
Mhm.
but I think people should be very careful about how they phrase things, right? Because I'm sure there's people who are on stage all the time who still get nervous. I'm not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but the assumption that I would be because, you know, maybe I don't speak in public is just, it was just a bit blind. I think it was just tone deaf, really.
Mhm. Definitely,
And
like
just to add,
mhm.
didn't ask my colleague who was also speaking whether he
Mhm.
was nervous.
Of
Because of course,
course.
why would he be, right? And it's well meant,
Mm.
um, but it's also targeted, right? So am I
Mhm.
nervous, but not my colleague,
Mhm.
um, who looks, you know, very senior, very, you know, executive level, which he is, but so am I. I mean, I'm CEO, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of, so it's that whole thing, and it's I always wonder, you know, don't be grumpy, don't make an assumption that's what someone means. Try to educate as opposed to get grumpy. And most days I would go, I suppose you didn't mean to sound rude, but I
Mhm.
do lots of these, so no, I'm not. Or even just not, but just answer nicely. And I did just let him off because he meant well. But I do think that sometimes it's a teachable moment because for me, it doesn't bother me. It kind of glances off me because
Mm.
I'm in a position now where I'm fortunate I can pick what jobs I do and who I speak to. But you've got to kind of send the elevator down. And he would say that, you know, that might really knock someone's confidence if it was, let's say, for example, a woman who was going to speak and she saw that she was asked those questions, but her male colleague
Mhm.
was not, you know, and that might make someone feel less confident. So I think it's important that we build everyone up and that we really try and be careful in what we say. And that's most particularly on social media because there is a casualness
Mhm.
about cruelty that really hurts people's feelings. And again, some of us are more robust than others. So I've done some social media stuff that has had millions of views, right? Not because of me, just because of the platform. And the comments are, some of the comments are just trolling about the way someone looks, or that I should be in jail because of where I'm from and my job. They've never listened. These are people who don't obviously have the concentration to listen to the whole interview, so they've
Oh
just
my
seen headline
gosh.
burglar, right? And it doesn't bother me one bit. In fact, I wouldn't even see them, except that some of them are quite funny. They're unintentionally quite funny, and so my kids have showed me a few of them. Like one, like I won't say, but like, you know, stuff about my weight or whatever. So one of them said, I see, this makes me laugh. Now there might be people out there who might wonder why I laugh at this, but I thought this was hysterical. And it said she probably robs, what was it, cake shops. And I thought, oh,
Oh
do you know what I mean? Because I'm not slim or whatever, I'm a bit chubby, and so my son knew I'd laugh, and he told me. But you know, I think there's a casualness to this.
wow.
And I think that's, to me, it glances off me, I'm not that bothered. But I've got colleagues, again, some of whom are authors as well, who it turns much darker, much quicker.
Yeah.
So I guess it's about respect. And as a woman, and as someone who's got something of a platform, I sometimes choose to be grumpy about it. And I wonder if I get a clap back from a lot of the people listening to this, is that there's times when actually teachable moment.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for, going into that. People are far too comfortable on the internet. That's I think that's the least I can say about that. So, I wanna go back to it. Your new book, which is People Hacker: Confessions of a Burglar for Hire, is currently available for pre-order, or is it out now?
So it was released, as I'm speaking to you, it was released just about a week ago in the UK and parts of Europe. I did not do those negotiations myself. Obviously, I've got representation and the publisher, who are currently negotiating with more worldwide rights, okay? Because the way it works in publishing, apparently, and some of you may know this, I didn't, is that you do home territory first. I think if I'd have been a known author, they might have gone global. But anyway, it's released in the UK. Before I was released, we went to #1 in the charts on Amazon in several categories.
Wow.
And actually, the highest I got, I think, in the Amazon Top 100 was number, I want to say 47, but it could have been 49. But I'm going to say 47.
Wow.
And now, of course, it didn't stay there. It kind of hovered in the top 100 for a couple of days, and now I'm still in the top 1,000. But we did top categories. That was before we released, and then on the day of release, it got a little bit higher in most categories as well. And on Audible, which I read myself, which I can tell you is a nightmare. Just a horrible, reading your own words in your own voice, but having to do all the intonations and things. I mean, I'm not an actor, so that was quite the thing. And the producer just sort of saying, say that again. I'd say, so I'd say something like walking down the staircase, and go down the staircase, walking down the staircase, and again down the staircase. I mean, just, oh my God, how actors do it. It's just, it drove me crazy. And so they're available now in the UK. What I'm hoping is that we will quickly wrap up this negotiation stateside so that we can get it out to America, because I have lots of people I've worked with. Hi, everyone. Lots of people I've met. Hi, ACFE. Who I know have messaged me and asked for, how do we get hold of this book? How do we get signed copies? And so, we're hoping to get that done. Essentially, it's a memoir. It starts in my childhood with some things that happened to me that kind of were light bulb moments in terms of my future career. I wanted to make it really easy to read. So a lot of the reviews, a lot of the people who are contacting me are saying, I read it in a weekend. It's easy. It's, something that I can race through. So I don't it's not boring about childhood. It's done in a series of episodes of different things that happened to me. going right up to sort of almost the present day, I basically chose about 15 different either incidents in childhood, which were more or less social engineering and break-ins, let's face it, all the way up to showing a range of the jobs I do. Everything from those that were very dangerous and that were at a very high level, involving, you know, international criminals and things, which of course I can't name, to some of the capers that we did, which I know the ACFE members enjoyed a lot when I spoke about it in New York. So times when the jobs have gone wrong and there's been cats turning up on a job, or, you know, I've fallen off the roof, or we've met people. So that's what, you know, those are the stories. I thought that, you know, I picked some of the jobs I've done that make good stories, but then incorporated into that is a lot of descriptions and advice about security generally, about social engineering in particular and the security industry, and also some of my thoughts on things like diversity in the security industry and what we can do to really change our thinking as technology progresses. So, you know, I've tried to pack a lot into it so that you get good bang for your buck, and let's hope that that's what happens. I just want to say thanks a lot for having me on the show, and also just to do a big wave and a shout out to all the lovely ACFE people that I met in New York. You guys were so friendly to me, made me so welcome. So it's so nice to come back on and do the podcast for you today.
Well, thank you again, Jenny, for joining us today. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to chat with us.
Oh, thank you. That's such a kind thing to say. It's been my pleasure.
And thank you for listening. You can find this podcast along with all other episodes of Fraud Talk on acfe.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been Rihonna Scoggins, signing off.